How's it going, everybody? It's an honor to be here today, closing out the festival, Games for Change. Today, I'm going to talk to you about closing the loop, the dawn of neuroimmersive gaming. All right, so we already went through my background a little bit. I have a mixed background of engineering, art, and design. I've had the privilege to work with some amazing people at the MIT Media Lab. As I was already stated, I was the co-founder and CEO, or I am the co-founder and CEO of OpenBCI. I've done some work in augmented reality. I've taught a number of classes in graduate programs at NYU ITP and as well as Parsons School of Design, ranging from creative coding to physical computing, as well as, I think, my favorite course of all time, an academic elective called Designing Consciousness. As I mentioned, my background prior to my MFA was in engineering. And then, I kind of shifted directions a little bit into art for my master's program. And, I think the big, when I was in my engineering program, we were really taught all about the what and the how. And I think that, the biggest takeaway that I got from my MFA program was the why, like learning how to be inspired. And I'll get more into that later on in the presentation. And I also put up here the fact that I played D1 college football and college rugby because it was a huge part of my introduction into neurotechnology. So today I invent computer interfaces for the human mind. All right. So people often ask me, how did you get into neurotech? And a lot of times people think that I have a background in neuroscience or I have a background in psychology or something along those lines. But actually, my interest in the brain and the mind actually came from playing contact sports. So, I played college football and I played college rugby at a pretty high level. And throughout those experiences, I actually suffered a number of pretty severe concussions. And that was really the beginning of me starting to, explore my own consciousness and kind of dealing with the aftermath of those concussions. I really started to think about, the difference of the mind and the brain, and the fact that, the mind is kind of the software that runs on the hardware. And if you damage the hardware, you feel it in the software. And so when I graduated from Columbia, and stopped playing contact sports, definitely for the better, I was in a really kind of dark place. And I was going to doctors and, they were telling me everything was fine, but I knew things weren't fine. I didn't feel the same as I had. And so, I without really knowing what to do, kind of began trying to hack my own consciousness in a sense. Around that time, I ended up discovering this amazing tutorial on the internet. It was an open source walkthrough on how to hack a toy EEG device to get your brainwaves into a computer through an Arduino. And they had this very simple demo where you were able to move a bar graph up and down just by focusing. So, you could channel your attention. And as soon as I realized that it mostly worked, it was really kind of an aha moment for me. It was a love at first sight moment. And I remember that day as essentially the beginning of my career, because, from that point forward, I got my hands on every, low cost brain computer interface that I could and really have never looked back. I also recommend that if you're interested in this, go check out this tutorial because it's still today a very, very awesome tutorial. So here, this is me back in grad school with the first BCI that I ever built. It's pretty janky looking, but it worked. It was a single sensor EEG system that was able to measure brainwaves and log them to an SD card. And, with that device, I ended up building a prototype of an application where I could log my, daily activities, the things I was eating, as well as my moods. At that time, I was still having a lot of issues with kind of mood, irregularity and feeling very high on some days and very low on other days. And so I was really interested in trying to use, something quantitative, in this case, EEG, to try to stitch together, these kind of qualitative states of mind and try to, use EEG data as the glue between, my daily habits and activities and my own state of mind. During that time, my first proposed thesis was to build an open source brain computer interface platform to which my advisors said, "You're crazy. There's no way that you can do that in a year." And they were right. So I ended up pivoting, and I had the luxury and the privilege of getting to work with some really amazing advisors and teachers in grad school. The two listed here are actually both former speakers at Games for Change, and they had a huge influence on where I ended up taking my thesis, which I will jump to now. So my thesis at Parsons was a short interactive game or narrative where you as the player actually influenced the story with your brain activity. So I like to think it was the first neuro-immersive narrative or game that was made. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But what I really wanted to do was to try to tie the mechanic of the brain activity influencing the story to the actual narrative of the story. And so in this story, you are kind of perceiving this experience or reliving this experience from the perspective of this humanoid robot that is operating a geothermal power plant on the moon of Io, or the moon Io of Jupiter. And so the story begins, and you're wearing a headset and you're plugged in, and the game is measuring your attention. The story begins, and you end up making a mistake where you essentially decide to save the life of a fellow robot unit. And it goes against the code in your logic because you're programmed not to halt the plant operations, unless it's to save X number of robot units. And so you end up making this empathetic choice to save a similar being, and then the system that you're inside of starts to try and debug you and understand what's going on. And so here's the moment where the alpha unit detects that you've made a mistake at overseeing this drill operation. And so over the course of the story, in each chapter, your attention is being measured, and then at the end of the chapter, you end up moving up in the plot tree or across in the plot tree or down in the plot tree, and you end up getting to multiple different endings. And in a sense, what ends up happening is the more cognitively engaged you are with the story, the more human, or your sense of free will and your sense of kind of the singularity moment starts to become more real. Whereas if you're less cognitively engaged with the story, you end up kind of reverting back to robothood. And so I won't spoil the ending. You can ask me in the Q&A, but I can go through some of the multiple endings and my thinking there. But here you can see the kind of branching narrative structure where in chapter 1, you always get the same chapter. And then you kind of move through this plot tree depending on your brain's engagement. And this is the moment at the end when you're actually getting debugged by the alpha system. So yeah, so after graduating with my MFA, I had the amazing opportunity to start an open source company to push BCI into the world and to try to lower the barrier of entry. So I ended up partnering up with one of my professors from grad school to launch a Kickstarter campaign. And to our amazing surprise and delight, we ended up raising over $200,000 to found OpenBCI. So OpenBCI is an open source hardware and software company, and we build tools for interfacing the human brain and body. Our equipment is now being worked with in over 90 countries around the world. We ended up designing a 3D printable EEG headset, and all of our code and design files can be found on our GitHub and on our website. So our mission has really been to push the industry forward, kind of from the back and level the playing field for students and engineers and entrepreneurs to get involved with, learning about the human brain and the human mind. So here you can see some of our products. Our kind of bread and butter products are the biosensing boards, very similar to an Arduino, that allow you to measure data from the brain, the muscles, the heart, as well as headsets and accessories for making those devices more valuable or useful. So yeah, I love this example. So, this was a very playful example where we ended up taking 5 people and having each of their brainwaves control a different command for this RC floating shark. So, one of them was responsible for left, right, another one up, down, and then and forward. And so, we've had a lot of really fun examples where we have people kind of doing new interfaces and inputs to, real world objects and remote control, robots and, floating sharks. But, on top of that, we've also, really helped move the research community forward. And, this is getting back to my point of inspiration. I think inspiration kind of changes over time. In the beginning of my pursuit into BCI, it was somewhat selfish. I wanted to learn about my own brain and how to help myself. But then the more I got into the space, the more I realized that these technologies are going to have a profound impact on people who need them much more than I do. So in 2015, I had the genuine pleasure of meeting Gal Sant. So Gal, was a programmer and developer, and tragically was diagnosed with ALS. And when I was at this conference in Tel Aviv, I was presenting the first prototype of the Ultra Cortex, our 3D printed headset. And most people were like, "Oh, what is that toy?" And they weren't giving me the time of day. But then Gal, rolled up in his wheelchair, and his face just lit up with awe and excitement, because he saw and understood how profound this technology could be for him and people with motor disabilities like him. And so Gal and I ended up becoming friends and working together kind of remotely over the course of a couple of years. And then when we ran our second Kickstarter campaign, we ended up doing a stretch goal to build Gal a custom Ultra Cortex. So we were, 3D scan his head and design one that was custom fit for him. Tragically, at a point, a couple years into our relationship, Gal decided to be taken off of life support because his condition had really digressed, and he didn't want to be a liability for his family anymore. And I'll never forget the day when I heard the news that Gal had passed away. And so Gal was and still is a major inspiration for me. And I think, as you go out and start your own company and start to develop your career, I think, having purpose is a very, very meaningful and valuable thing for your soul. And I think, finding the inspiration to kind of keep that purpose is a really important thing. And Gal has always been an inspiration for me and will continue to be. So shortly after that, I ended up kind of taking a little hiatus from OpenBCI. The company had put a number of products into the world, and we had, kind of reached a certain level of stability. And so I ended up going out to San Francisco and working at this augmented reality company called Meta as the director of advanced interfaces. And I was brought there to begin to explore, the intersection of augmented reality and virtual reality, head-mounted displays and biosensing. So my job was to kind of blueprint what it would look like to integrate physiological and psychological sensors into the next generation of computing, which are, AR and VR. Unfortunately, a year into my time there, the company, was on the venture capital train, and they ran out of money and, ended up having to kind of close up shop. But it was a very enriching experience for me. I got to work with some really brilliant and talented scientists and engineers, and it was actually a very big inspiration for what I ended up coming back to OpenBCI to begin working on. So in the summer of 2019, a PhD student at the MIT Media Lab by the name of Guillermo Bernal and I decided to begin a joint passion project of really kind of taking this idea of AR and VR and mixed reality and fusing it with electrophysiology and measuring data from the human brain and mind. Back then we called the project Nova XR. Over time, the name changed to Galea, and actually a big reason for naming the project Galea was Gal. So Gal means wave in Hebrew, which I think is very poetic because the data that comes out of the brain, it's all waves. What we're measuring and what we're looking at is waves and wave patterns. And so, for the last 2 years, we've been building Galea, which is jump to the next. It is a add-on for AR and VR headsets that's capable of measuring data from not just the brain, but the brain, the muscles, the heart, the skin, and the eyes. So it's got a whole bunch of different sensors, and this is something that I've learned over time, is that EEG data alone is valuable, but not as valuable as EEG data in the context of other types of physiological sensors. So here are two alpha prototypes of the Galea devices. We're going to begin selling these devices to beta applicants this fall. So if you're interested, go check out galea.co. We have an application form there to join up to receive information about it. But let me show you this slide. So here's a kind of a skeleton wireframe, and you can see that we've packed a ton of sensors into the strapparatus, as we call it, which is the kind of harness that locks the VR headset onto your head, as well as the face pad. So the face pad has sensors for measuring the muscle data above and below each eye. It measures the moisture on your forehead. So a great example of this is if you get up and on a stage and you're a little bit nervous, you might feel that the sweat on your brow starts to get a little bit wetter. That type of thing can be measured, in smaller, kind of more incremental changes, and can be mapped to arousal and stress and things like that. And then we also have data for electrical data, EOG, for measuring the eyes. And then the VR headset is going to be integrated with image-based eye tracking. So this, I like to call it kind of the Ferrari of biosensing headsets, where we've really gone above and beyond to pack as many sensors into this device as possible. And I'm really excited to push it into the world. So what have I learned, over the course of the past decade working with physiological sensors and trying to interface the brain and the mind? I've learned that, humanity, we're headed in this direction where, traditional computers, our monitors, our phones, our desktop computers, they're moving onto our body. 10 years from now, 5 to 10 years from now, it's going to be totally normal to see people walking around in the street with advanced headsets where you have an entire operating system that you're walking around with. And, we're going to see way fewer displays and monitors because we're going to have displays on our face. And, you'll probably end up having a different headset for different, situations. Like you'll have a work headset, you'll have a street headset, you'll have an entertainment headset. But this trend is happening. We are, this is kind of the final frontier of cyborgia and kind of, humans and technology combining, is that we're going to have computers integrated into and onto the body. So, this diagram I use in almost all of my presentations, but I really like this to kind of paint a picture of where we are and where we're headed. So computers today, you can kind of think of yourself as that little cheesy guy on the left, and then the applications and the tools that run inside of computers as the little robot head on the right. Today we have this very conscious relationship with computers where we have a mouse board or a keyboard and a mouse and various ways of consciously inputting information into a computer. And then we receive conscious information back from the computer. We get, emails, notifications, alerts and things like that. But where we're headed is this kind of outer loop where we have, this already exists to a certain degree in certain applications, but information is going to be tracked kind of subconsciously about the way that we are interfacing with applications and tools inside of computers. And then on top of that, there are going to be subconscious ways of writing back to the brain or the mind where we have non-perceptible neuromodulation. An example of this already today is if you go into any social media tool, the content that is prepared and presented to you is based on your interaction with previous content. So this idea of this like feedback loop where you have kind of constructive or destructive interference patterns to give you optimized content, we're already there, and certain companies are already figuring this out, but that's going to be extrapolated much further as we get better sensors, and better ways of kind of decoding intent and human emotions and things like that. And then also more sophisticated ways of writing back to the brain. So, obviously this poses a lot of really, really interesting ethical questions that I would be happy to jump into in the Q&A after this talk. But, if you take anything away from this talk, I would really kind of think about this diagram because, in the future, I think we're going to have these artificial intelligent agents that exist inside of our computers that are making our computers highly personalized. And this is what I mean by the OS of the mind. We are building computers that will have a key architectural component, which is your brain or your mind. And applications and tools inside of our computer will be highly personalized to us. So what does this mean for gaming? Bringing it back to gaming. So, with this type of data, neurodata, there are two big subsets for neurodata. There's active data and passive data. So what I mean by active data is like you actively controlling in real time something in the game or the experience. So, essentially replacing, buttons, joysticks, keyboard, mouse, etc. And this is, I think, going to be predominantly repurposing muscles and motor function from the arm, the scalp, things like that to give us almost new types of keyboards. So people often ask why wouldn't we just use a keyboard and how is this different than a keyboard? And the reality is it's actually not. So, when you first learn how to use a keyboard, it's not intuitive, but today, after you've used a keyboard for a long time, you don't think about pressing each key. You actually are, in a sense, kind of subconsciously speaking through your hands. So, over time, we're going to learn to use new types of keyboards where we have to train ourselves to interface with new types of sensors around our face and on our scalp to interact with technology in new ways. The other data set, the passive data set, I actually think is arguably much more interesting and potentially more valuable from a commercial and also a personal perspective. So, this is looking at data over time. Oftentimes this is referred to as opportunistic sensing. So looking at the way that a user is reacting to certain stimuli or certain content, decoding the emotions in the context of experiences and games or things like that, looking at attention, cognitive workload, arousal, stress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you can imagine how valuable this data really is and, what it's going to do for games and also other types of experiences. So here is a demo that we did at the NYC Media Lab event in New York. I think it was back in 2016. But this was a participant at the event who put the headset on for the first time, and we did a EMG, a motor function, a muscle function mapping between a muscle on his scalp and the robot hand. And he didn't have to train the device at all. He put it on and it just worked. And this was a really, really fun demo, and it really kind of just leads to or makes you realize how valuable these technologies are going to be for both, your everyday average user, but also people who need them, for interacting with the world. So we're currently working on right now a demo where we're going to be, playing a VR racing game and controlling the car with motor function and muscles on the face. So you'll be driving the car without your hands. Obviously, we're not going to do this in the real world because that would be dangerous. But this is really happening, and it's possible today to have new types of kind of neurotech interfaces to control things in virtual and real world environments. I'm also very excited, kind of extrapolating from my thesis. Here's one of my favorite interactive narrative games, the Stanley Parable. But what neurotechnology and what BCI is going to do for new types of kind of choose your own adventure experiences or games that evolve based on the way that the player is playing the game. So now you think of your typical kind of like multiple choice response to characters that you interact with in a game. But I think over time, a lot of that is going to be moved under the hood, where the game is aware of the things that are exciting you and the things that are stressing you out and the characters that you like. And the plot is actually going to evolve and change based on you as the player. In a sense, you almost become the game and the game becomes you. So beyond gaming, and I think that gaming for BCI, especially BCI or interfacing the mind in the context of VR and AR, gaming is going to be the biggest industry to start. I think that gamers are oftentimes, willing to experiment with new types of technologies. And I think that what BCI and neurotech is going to do for gaming is really just provide or create an entirely new genre of gaming where your brain and your mind are core to the experience. But beyond that, we at OpenBCI, our traditional market is research and development. So these tools are going to be used in academic environments and research environments around the world. And then beyond that, simulation and training, therapy and rehabilitation. So a great example for therapy would be individuals with PTSD. So post-traumatic stress syndrome. One of the techniques to kind of helping people overcome that is immersion therapy, where you reintroduce people back into the experience that elicits the traumatic feelings, and you try to kind of work them back into it gradually over time. Turns out that that's actually very hard to do, especially with certain types of traumatic experiences in real life. And VR is actually a much better way of doing it, where you're in a more controlled environment, but also, there's a kill switch. You can take the headset off if it becomes too intense. So, I really think that, these tools beyond gaming are going to make a huge impact for a lot of people in cognitive health, ranging from attention disorders to, new types of interfaces for motor disability and individuals with paralysis. But, you'll notice the bottom point here. I firmly believe that computers 10 years from now, or maybe even sooner, are going to have, this kind of neurotechnology architectural component that are core to the operating system and the computer itself, where, the computer is empathetic and understanding to you as an individual, and it really helps shape the experience, the interfaces around you. And, I like this idea of thinking that there's this little digital Jiminy Cricket that's going to exist inside of our future computers that, helps us with technology addiction and kind of optimizing our daily moods and routines to kind of guide us towards certain mental states and, desired mental states and away from undesired mental states. Let's just hope, that we end up building these solutions in a way where you, the user, maintain agency and control over the way that those AI algorithms are optimizing your content and experience. So, and then, to tie it back to, the kind of beyond gaming, like, what I think this is going to do, I really think that, these types of devices, while they might start in the kind of gaming and kind of, fun areas, I think that they will have a profound impact on the lives of people like Gal. Providing individuals with ALS and individuals with motor disability the ability to communicate with their family and have more agency as individuals, throughout time and hopefully live longer and happier lives. And while I think that, gaming is a really fun and exciting start, this type of technology is going to evolve into changing the world for everybody. And so on that note, how am I doing? I went over a little bit. Sorry about that. I just want to say thank you. And, it's been an honor to wrap up this conference. And I hope you guys will come and join me at the Imagine Q&A room after this chat. Thank you very much.